Shy receptionist speaks ISL with deaf elderly man and doesn't realize the director was watching. Emily Parker wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the elderly gentleman gesturing desperately at the reception desk of Mercy Medical Center in Philadelphia. For 3 hours he had been trying to schedule an urgent appointment for his wife, but no staff member could understand him. It was then that she realized he was using ASL. Her hands trembled as she approached the counter and began responding in sign language, something she had learned in secret to communicate with her late grandmother. "Do you need help scheduling an appointment?" asked Emily in ASL, surprising the man. The gentleman's face lit up. For the first time in hours, someone understood him. "My wife is very sick. I need a cardiologist urgently," he signed back, with tears in his eyes. "I've been to 3 clinics today, but nobody can understand me." Emily felt her heart tighten. She knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible and misunderstood. During her 2 years working at the clinic, her extreme shyness made her stutter whenever she needed to speak with patients. "How is she feeling?" Emily asked, completely ignoring that other people in line were starting to complain about the delay. "Chest pains, shortness of breath, and she fainted yesterday," the gentleman explained. "She's 68 years old. I'm very scared." Hidden behind his office door, Dr. Richard Thompson, the clinic director, watched the entire scene. He had come out to reprimand Emily for wasting time with a difficult patient, as manager Karen Wilson had complained, but something about those gestures paralyzed him. Emily typed on the computer with an efficiency she had never shown before. Her eyes shone as she communicated fluently in ASL, transforming into a completely different person. "I'll get you an appointment for today," she signed to the gentleman. "Doctor, Michael Reynolds is our best cardiologist. He'll take good care of your wife." "How did you learn ASL so young?" asked the elderly man, curious. Emily hesitated. She had never told her story to anyone. "My grandmother became deaf at 60 after an infection," she explained in signs. "I learned so she wouldn't feel alone. She passed 2 years ago, but I kept practicing at home." The gentleman smiled affectionately. She must be proud of the granddaughter she raised. At that moment, Karen Wilson appeared like a hurricane. "Emily, what are you doing?" she shouted, making the young woman jump. "There's a huge line waiting and you're standing there doing charades." Emily felt her face burn with shame. Her hands began to tremble violently. I was just," she stammered, becoming the usual shy receptionist again. "Just what?" "Wasting time," Karen continued. "This gentleman needs to find a place specialized for disabled people. We don't have the facilities for that kind of service here." The gentleman, even without hearing the words, understood from the body language that Emily was being reprimanded for helping him. He tried to intervene, signaling that it was okay, but Karen completely ignored him. "And you, sir, need to bring an interpreter next time," said Karen, gesturing exaggeratedly and speaking loudly, as if the problem was that he couldn't see. Emily felt a mix of anger and sadness. The gentleman had been rejected at 3 different places, and now he was witnessing the same humiliation here. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now. Continuing. "Excuse me," Emily said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "He doesn't need an interpreter. I can help him." Karen turned around, incredulous. "You know ASL?" "Yes, and Mr. Walter needs an urgent appointment for his wife. She might be having serious heart problems." "Mr. Walter," Dr. Richard finally emerged from behind the door, approaching the group. Everyone turned, surprised. Emily paled, thinking she would be fired on the spot. The director carefully observed the elderly man's face, then his hands. There was something familiar about him, but he couldn't pinpoint what. "Emily, you said he needs an urgent appointment," asked Dr. Richard in a much softer voice than expected. "Yes, doctor. His wife is showing symptoms that could indicate serious heart problems," replied Emily, still trembling. Dr. Richard addressed Mr. Walter and, to everyone's surprise, made a basic ASL sign. "Hello." The gentleman smiled and responded in signs. "Sorry, my knowledge is very limited," said the director. "Emily, could you translate for me?" Karen watched the scene open-mouthed. She had never seen the director treat an employee with such consideration, especially Emily, whom she considered the most incompetent on the team. "Mr. Walter says his wife Dorothy has been sick for a week," Emily translated. "Chest pains, shortness of breath, dizziness, and a fainting spell yesterday. He's desperate." Dr. Richard made some mental notes. "Tell him I will personally examine his wife. Can he bring her now?" When Emily translated, Mr. Walter began to cry with relief. "He says she's in the car in the clinic's garage," Emily continued translating. "She couldn't walk here." "Karen, call for a wheelchair and a nurse," ordered the director. "And cancel my next meeting." Karen obeyed, still confused by the whole situation. While they waited, Dr. Richard watched Emily with renewed interest. The shy young woman had completely transformed while using ASL, showing a compassion and efficiency he had never noticed. "Emily, how long have you known ASL?" he asked. "5 years, doctor," she replied, still nervous. "I learned to communicate with my grandmother." "And you never mentioned this in your interview or file?" Emily lowered her head. "I didn't think it would be important. I had never met anyone deaf here." Dr. Richard felt a pang of guilt. In 2 years he had never really spoken with Emily, only receiving reports from Karen about her unsuitability for the job. Mr. Walter returned with a frail lady in the wheelchair. Dorothy had greying hair and a tired look, but she smiled gratefully upon seeing Emily conversing in ASL with her husband. "She hears well," explained Emily. "Only Mr. Walter is deaf." Dr. Richard personally escorted the couple to his office, something that surprised the entire team. Karen stayed at the reception, stewing in her frustration. During the examination, Emily served as the interpreter, translating every question and answer. Her competence impressed Dr. Richard, who realized how naturally communication flowed when there were no barriers. After a series of tests, the diagnosis was confirmed. Dorothy had a severe cardiac arrhythmia, which could have had serious consequences if not treated immediately. "If you had waited a few more days, it could have been too late," explained Dr. Richard, while Emily translated for Mr. Walter. The elderly man turned pale upon understanding the gravity of the situation, but also deeply grateful. "He wants to know how he can thank you," translated Emily. "No need to thank me, but I would like to know more about you. Mr. Walter, what do you do for work?" Emily asked the question in ASL. "He was a teacher," she translated. "He taught for 40 years at a school for the deaf." Dr. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. A distant memory began to form in his mind. "Teacher of what subject?" he asked. His voice slightly changed. "He taught many things, but his specialty was ASL. She helped families with deaf children learn to communicate." Dr. Richard abruptly stood up from his chair. "Excuse me, I'm going to get some medications." He left the room with his heart racing. It couldn't be a coincidence. He needed to confirm his suspicions. In the hallway, he found Karen organizing some papers. "Karen, do you know this gentleman's full name?" "Walter Coleman Harris." "Why?" Dr. Richard closed his eyes. It was him. 15 years ago, his son Stephen had been in a car accident that left him temporarily deaf. The doctors said his hearing might or might not return, and Stephen fell into a deep depression. That's when they met Professor Walter, who voluntarily taught ASL to families in crisis situations. For 6 months, he visited the Thompson home 3 times a week, teaching not just ASL, but restoring hope and dignity to the boy. When Stephen regained his hearing a few months later, he had become a different person, more empathetic, stronger. Today he was a pediatrician in New York City, inspired by that experience of overcoming. Dr. Richard had never forgotten that teacher's kindness, but lost touch when the family moved. He took a deep breath and returned to the office. "Mr. Walter," he got the elderly man's attention. "Emily, ask him if he remembers a boy named Stephen Thompson 15 years ago." Emily asked the question. Mr. Walter's face immediately lit up. "He says he does remember," translated Emily. "Stephen was a very sad boy who became deaf after an accident, but he was smart and brave. He asks if you know how he is." Dr. Richard felt tears welling up. "Tell him Stephen is my son, and that he's a doctor today thanks to Mr. Walter. When Emily translated, the elderly teacher was shocked. He looked at Dr. Richard with recognition and emotion. "He says he remembers you now," Emily continued, also emotional. "He says Stephen was special, that he knew he would become someone important." Dr. Richard could no longer contain himself. He hugged Mr. Walter, who returned the gesture with fatherly affection. "You saved my son," he said, knowing Dorothy could translate. "When he lost his hearing, he lost his will to live. You gave that back to him." Dorothy moved, translated for her husband, who just smiled humbly. "He says he was just doing his job," Emily translated, "helping people find themselves again." From that day on, everything changed at Mercy Medical Center. Dr. Richard implemented a comprehensive inclusion program. He mandated that all staff learn basic ASL and promoted Emily from receptionist to inclusive care coordinator. Emily initially tried to refuse the promotion. "Doctor, I don't have the experience for this," she said, stammering. "You have something much more important, genuine empathy and the ability to communicate when it matters," replied Dr. Richard. "Besides, Mr. Walter has accepted our invitation to teach ASL classes for the entire team. You would be our perfect coordinator." Karen was not at all happy about Emily's rise. For years she had treated the young woman as incompetent and now found herself in a hierarchically inferior position. "This is absurd," she complained to the other employees. "A receptionist who can barely speak properly being promoted. This is favoritism from the director." Karen's words resonated with some employees who began to question the decision. Emily noticed the hostility and began to doubt her abilities. "Maybe she's right," she confessed to Mr. Walter during one of his visits. "I really don't know if I can do this." "Courage doesn't mean not being afraid," he replied in ASL. "It means doing what's right, even when you are afraid." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This helps us tremendously as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, Emily Parker's first real test came 2 weeks later. A family arrived at the medical center in total panic. Their 12-year-old son, deaf from birth, had been seriously injured during a soccer game. "He's in a lot of pain, but we couldn't explain to the doctor exactly what happened," said the mother, desperate. Emily was called immediately. In the emergency room, she found the boy crying and gesturing frantically, trying to explain his pain to the medical team. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said in ASL. "I'm going to help you talk to the doctors." The relief on the boy's face was immediate. "It hurts a lot here," he signed, pointing to his shoulder. "I fell and felt something pop." Emily translated for Dr. Michael Reynolds, who was handling the case. "Ask if he can move his arm," requested the doctor. Over the next 20 minutes, Emily served as a bridge between the boy and the medical team. Her precise translation allowed for a quick diagnosis, a dislocated shoulder, easily treatable. "You did an exceptional job," Dr. Michael told Emily. "Without you, it would have been much harder to help this boy." The family was so grateful that they wrote a thank you letter to the medical center's administration, specifically praising Emily's work. Dr. Richard Thompson read the letter during a meeting with the entire team. "This is what it means to make a difference in people's lives," he said, looking directly at Emily. "It's not just about medicine, it's about humanity." Karen Wilson, present at the meeting, felt a mix of shame and envy. She began to realize that her prejudiced attitudes were being questioned by everyone. The medical center's ASL program began to attract attention. Mr. Walter, retired but with renewed energy, came 3 times a week to teach the staff. His classes were different from any traditional training. He told moving stories about his students over the years, teaching not just the signs, but the importance of inclusive communication. "ASL isn't just about hands," he signed, while Emily translated for the staff who were still learning. "It's about opening your heart to others." During one of these classes, news arrived that would change everything again. A journalist from the Pennsylvania Broadcasting Network had heard about the medical center's program and wanted to do a story. Dr. Richard was excited, but Emily panicked. "Doctor, I can't be on television," she said, trembling. "I can't speak in public. I'll stutter and be embarrassed." "Emily, you speak perfectly well in ASL," replied Dr. Richard, "and that is a language just as valid as English." But people will judge me. They'll think it's strange. Mr. Walter, who was present, asked to speak with her privately. You know what my biggest mistake was when I was young? He asked in ASL. Thinking that my disability made me less capable. It took me years to understand that it made me different, not inferior. But you've always been brave, Emily replied. No, I was terrible. I was ashamed of being deaf. I hid from people. It was only when I started helping others that I found my strength. Emily reflected on the teacher's words. In recent months, she had discovered a version of herself she didn't even know existed. The story was scheduled for the following week. Emily spent the previous days practicing her speech, but she remained nervous. On the day of the recording, the Pennsylvania Broadcasting Network crew arrived early. The reporter Jennifer Miller was known for her sensitive stories on social inclusion. We're doing a series on companies that promote accessibility, explained Jennifer. Your story is very inspiring. The first interviews were with Dr. Richard and Mr. Walter. Both spoke about the importance of inclusion and how the program had transformed the clinic. When it was Emily's turn, her hands were visibly trembling. Take a deep breath, said Jennifer, noticing the nervousness. Let's start slowly. How did you learn ASL, was the first question. Emily began to answer verbally, but the words came out jumbled. Frustrated with herself, she stopped mid-sentence. Sorry, she said, I'm not good at this. That's when Mr. Walter approached. May I make a suggestion? He asked the reporter. Let her speak in ASL, I'll translate. Jennifer found the idea interesting. Emily, would you feel more comfortable that way? Emily nodded timidly. From the moment she began using ASL, she transformed. Her hands moved with elegance and expressiveness, telling her story with a passion that spoken words couldn't convey. She spoke about her grandmother, about the first time she saw Mr. Walter at the clinic, about how she discovered she could make a difference in people's lives. Communication doesn't need sound to be powerful, she signed, while the teacher translated. It just needs heart. The filming crew was moved. Jennifer, experienced in touching reports, admitted later that she had rarely witnessed such an authentic testimony. But the real surprise came when Emily decided at the end of the interview to try speaking again. I want to say something, she said verbally, her voice still shaky but determined. To all the people who feel different, our difference may be our greatest gift. We just need to find the right place to use it. The words came out clear, without stuttering. Jennifer smiled and hugged Emily. That's the most beautiful message I've ever heard, she said. The report aired the following week on the program Pennsylvania Today. The impact was greater than anyone could have imagined. The clinic received hundreds of calls from deaf people all over Philadelphia, wanting to schedule appointments. Other healthcare institutions began contacting the clinic to understand how to implement similar programs. Emily found herself, for the first time in her life, being recognized for her competence. Patients specifically requested to be seen by her. Colleagues from other clinics sought her out for advice. Karen, who had watched the report at home, felt a mix of admiration and shame. She realized she had treated Emily unfairly for years, letting prejudices blind her vision. The next day, she sought out Emily in private. I want to apologize, said Karen with difficulty. I was wrong about you, completely wrong. Emily was surprised by the sincerity. You don't need to apologize, Karen. We all have our limitations. No, insisted Karen. What I did was more than a limitation. It was pure prejudice, and I want to change that. What do you mean? I want to learn ASL, for real, and I want to help make this clinic a better place for everyone. Emily smiled for the first time in years while talking to Karen. Mr. Walter teaches classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You're welcome. Karen's transformation was remarkable. She, who used to complain about any inconvenience, now dedicated herself intensely to learning ASL. Her first classes were disastrous, but she persisted. This is much harder than I imagined, she confessed to Emily after a particularly frustrating lesson. Hard, but not impossible, replied Emily. Remember when you said I wasn't cut out to work with the public? Look where we are now. Karen laughed, realizing the irony. I really was a horrible boss, wasn't I? You were just a person who hadn't found the right way to see others, said Emily affectionately. But that has changed. The clinic's program continued growing. Dr. Richard was invited to give lectures at medical conferences, always taking Emily as a co-speaker. At the first conference in New York City, Emily was terrified. "There are over 500 doctors," she said to Dr. Richard. "I'm going to make a fool of myself." "You'll do exactly what you did on television," he replied. "You'll speak from the heart, and they will listen." The lecture was an absolute success. Emily presented data on how inclusive communication had improved patient satisfaction rates and reduced diagnostic errors. But the most impactful moment was when she told the story of Mr. Walter. "Sometimes our patients teach us more about medicine than any book," she said, now able to switch naturally between ASL and English. "They teach us about humanity, compassion, and the true art of healing." The audience rose in prolonged applause. Several doctors approached her afterward to ask for information on how to implement similar programs in their institutions. 6 months later, Mercy Medical Center had become a national reference for inclusive care. Emily had been promoted again, now to Manager of Inclusion and Humanization. On a Thursday afternoon, she was organizing materials for another ASL class when she received a special call. "Emily, this is Stephen Thompson." It took Emily a few seconds to process. Stephen, Dr. Richard's son, the boy who had inspired all that transformation. "Stephen, how are you?" "I'm great. My father told me everything that happened at the clinic, about how you found Professor Walter, about the inclusion program. I'm very moved." "Your father is an amazing person," said Emily. "And Mr. Walter always speaks of you very fondly. That's why I'm calling. I want to make a proposal." Stephen explained that he was organizing a national conference on inclusive medicine in partnership with the Department of Health. They wanted Mercy Medical Center to host the event and for Emily to be one of the keynote speakers. "I don't know, Stephen," Emily hesitated. "Speaking to doctors from all over the United States." "Emily," said Stephen firmly, "you changed my father's life, Professor Walter's life, my family's life. Your story needs to be known by more people." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The conference was scheduled for 3 months later. Emily spent this time preparing intensively, not only her presentation, but also working on her self-confidence. Mr. Walter, now 72, remained her biggest supporter. "You know what makes me most proud of you?" he asked during one of their ASL conversations. "What?" "That you found your voice. Not just the voice that comes from your mouth, but your true voice. The voice that touches people's hearts." During the conference week, Philadelphia welcomed over 1,000 healthcare professionals from across the United States. Mercy Medical Center was unrecognizable, transformed into a temporary convention center. Emily woke up on the day of her lecture with a knot in her stomach. It would be the largest audience of her life. Karen, who had become her great friend and supporter, brought her a special breakfast. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Terrified," admitted Emily. "What if I forget everything? What if I freeze in the middle of the presentation?" "Then you breathe. Remember why you're doing this and you continue," said Karen affectionately. "I'll be in the front row giving you strength." Emily's lecture was scheduled for 2 p.m. The main auditorium was packed, with people even sitting on the floor. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt her legs go weak. She looked out at the audience and saw the expectant faces of doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators. In the front rows were the people who had made that moment possible. Dr. Richard, smiling proudly, Karen, making encouraging signs, and Mr. Walter, together with his wife Dorothy, both beaming with happiness. Emily began her presentation in ASL, as it had become her trademark. 3 years ago, I was just a shy receptionist who could barely look patients in the eye. Her hands moved gracefully while an interpreter translated. "Today I'm here speaking to you about something I've learned. Medicine isn't just about healing the body. It's about connecting souls." She told her story, from her relationship with her deaf grandmother to the life-changing encounter with Mr. Walter. She spoke about how a simple conversation in ASL had changed not only his life but an entire institution. "Inclusion isn't a favor we do," she said, now alternating between ASL and English. "It's a right we guarantee. And when we guarantee that right, we discover that we too are transformed. The presentation lasted 50 minutes. Emily showed impressive data. Since the program's implementation, patient satisfaction had increased by 40%. Cases of misdiagnosis due to communication failure had dropped to almost zero, and the clinic had become sought after by people from other states. But the most moving moment was when she called Mr. Walter to the stage. "I want you to meet the man who taught me that there are many ways to speak, and all of them are valid when they come from the heart." The elderly teacher stepped onto the stage, visibly emotional. Emily translated his words for the audience. He says he never imagined when he began teaching ASL 40 years ago that one day he would be on a stage like this, Emily interpreted. He says that you, healthcare professionals, have the power to change lives every day, but that sometimes you forget you also have the power to give dignity. The audience fell completely silent. Many doctors had tears in their eyes. "He wants to leave a message," Emily continued, "that every patient we care for is more than a disease. They are a story, a family, a complete life. And when we treat these people with respect and inclusion, we become better doctors." The applause was deafening. The entire audience stood up, clapping for more than 5 minutes. After the lecture, Emily was surrounded by dozens of professionals wanting information on how to replicate the program in their institutions. Dr. Sarah Johnson from the New York City Health Department made a surprising proposal. "Emily, we would like to invite you to develop a pilot program for the entire public health network of New York City. It would be a 2-year project with implementation in 50 hospitals." Emily was speechless. It was an extraordinary opportunity, but also terrifying. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course, but know that we consider you the ideal person to lead this transformation." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She walked through the clinic's hallways, reflecting on her journey. 3 years earlier, she was an invisible young woman who hid behind her shyness. Now, she was being invited to transform the public health of an entire state. She found Dr. Richard still in his office, finishing some notes. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the proposal from New York," said Emily. "It's a great opportunity, but you're afraid," he completed. "Very afraid. What if I can't do it? What if I disappoint all those people?" Dr. Richard leaned back in his chair. "You know, Emily, when I first promoted you, many people questioned my decision. They said I was being impulsive, that a shy receptionist could never lead a program like this. And what did you answer? That they were only seeing what you were, not what you could become, and that sometimes the most unlikely people are exactly the ones who make a difference. But New York City is much bigger than our clinic, and you are much more than the receptionist I met 3 years ago," he said with fatherly affection. "Emily, you have a rare gift. You can truly see people. That's not something you learn in any university." The next day, Emily sought out Mr. Walter for a decisive conversation. "I'm afraid to accept," she confessed in ASL. "What exactly are you afraid of?" he asked. "Of failing, of not being able to help people the way I need to, of disappointing those who trust me." The professor smiled wisely. "When I started teaching 40 years ago, I was also afraid I wouldn't be able to teach properly, that I wouldn't be able to help the families who needed me. How did you overcome it?" "I understood one thing. The fear of failure is less than the pain of not trying. Imagine how many people you can help in New York City. Imagine how many Walters and Emilys are there, waiting for someone who sees them. But what if I fail? Then you learn, get up and try again. But what if you succeed? What if you transform the lives of thousands of people?" Emily spent the next week visiting public hospitals in Philadelphia, observing how patients with hearing disabilities were treated. What she saw shocked her. In most places, these people were treated as an inconvenience. Impatient doctors, nurses who spoke loudly as if that would solve the problem, desperate families trying to translate complex symptoms. In one hospital, she witnessed a scene that deeply marked her. A deaf woman was in labor, trying to communicate her pain to the medical team. No one could understand her, and she was clearly desperate. Emily approached and offered help. "How are you feeling?" she asked in ASL. "Thank God someone understands me," the woman replied, crying with relief. "The pain is very strong, but they don't know when to administer the anesthesia because they can't understand me. Emily served as an interpreter throughout the entire delivery. The experience was transformative for the medical team, who for the first time managed to communicate effectively with a deaf patient. "I never imagined how difficult it must be for them," the obstetrician said afterward. "How did you learn this?" "Out of necessity," Emily replied, "and because I realized that everyone deserves to be heard, even in silence." That night, Emily called Dr. Sarah Johnson. "I accept the challenge," she said, "but I have a few conditions." "What are they?" "First, Mr. Walter needs to be part of the team. He has experience that none of us have. Second, I want to implement the program gradually, hospital by hospital, to ensure quality. And third, each institution needs to have at least 3 staff members fluent in ASL." "Perfect," said Dr. Sarah. "When can you start?" "In 2 months. I need to wrap up some projects here in Philadelphia." The announcement that Emily was going to New York City caused quite a stir at Mercy Medical Center. Karen cried when she heard the news. "I'm going to miss you so much," she said. "You taught me to be a better person. And you taught me that people can change when they truly want to," Emily replied. Dr. Richard organized a farewell party that turned into a celebration of Emily's journey. Patients she had cared for over the years made sure to attend. Mr. Walter, who had decided to accompany Emily on her new journey, gave an emotional speech in ASL. "3 years ago, I walked into this clinic as a desperate man who couldn't help his sick wife," Emily translated his words. "Today I leave as a fulfilled man who had the opportunity to be part of a historic transformation." He paused and looked directly at Emily. "But the greatest lesson I learned was that sometimes angels appear when we least expect them, disguised as simple people who do extraordinary things." Emily began to cry, moved. "You were my angel," she replied in ASL. "You came into my life when I most needed to discover who I really was." The move to New York City was challenging. Emily had to step completely out of her comfort zone, living alone for the first time in her life in a huge city. The first hospital in the pilot project was New York Presbyterian Hospital, one of the largest hospital complexes in the United States. The task seemed impossible. "Where do we start?" Emily asked Mr. Walter as they walked through the endless hallways of the hospital. "At the beginning," he replied in ASL, "one person at a time." They started by training the emergency room staff, the department where effective communication could mean the difference between life and death. Dr. Robert Adams, head of the emergency room, was initially skeptical. "Look, Emily, I understand the importance of inclusion, but it's total chaos here. I don't know if my team will have time to be making gestures." "Doctor." "Robert," Emily replied calmly, "have you ever treated a deaf patient?" "A few." "How was the experience?" The doctor hesitated. "I admit it was frustrating. It took much longer, and often we weren't sure about the correct diagnosis." "Exactly. Now imagine if you could communicate with those patients as naturally as you're speaking with me now. How much time would you save? How many mistakes would you avoid?" Dr. Robert began to understand the logic. The first ASL course at New York Presbyterian Hospital had 20 participants. Emily and Mr. Walter developed a specific methodology for healthcare professionals, focusing on medical vocabulary and emergency situations. The first class was a disaster. The doctors and nurses were tired, some clearly there only out of obligation. Several left during the explanation. Emily went home discouraged. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," she confided in Mr. Walter. "Do you remember the first time I tried to teach your father?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "He didn't show up, said he was too busy, that ASL wasn't a priority for him." "How did you convince him?" "I didn't. Life convinced him. When he realized he couldn't communicate with his own son, he understood he needed to learn. But what if they never understand? Some never will, but others will, and those others will make all the difference." Mr. Walter was right. In the 3rd week, Dr. Robert sought out Emily with a story. "I treated a deaf patient last night," he said. "She came in with chest pain, very frightened. I tried using some signs I learned in class. It worked. I managed to understand she was having an anxiety attack, not a heart attack. I saved hours of unnecessary tests. From that day on, Dr. Robert became one of the program's biggest advocates. In 6 months, the emergency room at New York Presbyterian Hospital had been transformed. ASL posters were spread across the walls. The team had learned at least 50 basic signs, and 3 staff members had become fluent. The program began to expand to other areas of the hospital. Pediatrics, ICU, maternity, each department brought unique challenges, but also emotional victories. In pediatrics, Emily witnessed a scene that deeply moved her. A 7-year-old girl, deaf, had been admitted for surgery. She was terrified, crying non-stop. Dr. Amanda Foster, a pediatrician who had taken the ASL course, approached the girl's bed. "Hi, beautiful," she said in ASL. "My name is Jennifer. I'm going to take care of you." The little girl's face immediately lit up. "You know how to talk to me," she responded in ASL. "Yes, I do. And I want you to know you don't need to be afraid. I'll explain everything that's going to happen, okay?" For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Amanda explained the entire surgical procedure in ASL, in a way the child could understand. The girl asked questions, expressed her fears, and finally calmed down. "I've never seen a child calm down so quickly," the head nurse said to Emily. "It's magic." "It's not magic," Emily replied. "It's respect." The success of the program at New York Presbyterian Hospital caught the attention of the national media. Emily was invited to television shows, gave interviews to magazines, and her story spread throughout the United States. One day, she received an unexpected call. "Emily, this is Dr. Richard." "Dr. Richard, how are you?" "I'm great, but I'm calling to share some incredible news. Do you remember my son, Stephen?" "Of course. He's decided to leave pediatrics and specialize in inclusive medicine. He wants to open a clinic dedicated to serving deaf people." Emily was moved. What wonderful news! "And he wants you to be his partner." Emily nearly dropped the phone. "Partner? How?" "He wants to build a network of inclusive clinics across the United States, starting with New York City and Philadelphia, and he says he can't imagine anyone better to lead this project with him." It was a tempting offer, but Emily still had commitments to the public health program. "I need to think," she said. "I have responsibilities here in New York City." "Of course, but think about it carefully. It would be an opportunity to multiply the impact of your work on a national scale." That night, Emily had a long talk with Mr. Walter. "What do you think?" she asked in ASL. "I think you need to follow your heart," he replied. "Which of the 2 options excites you more?" Emily thought for a few moments. "Both, in different ways. In public service, I can help people who wouldn't have access otherwise. In a private clinic, I can create a model that others can copy. Then why not do both?" "How do you mean?" "Finish your 2-year project in public health. After that, open the clinic. Use the experience from one to strengthen the other." It was a sensible idea. Emily decided to talk to Stephen about the possibility of postponing the partnership for 2 years. To her surprise, Stephen thought the idea was even better. "Perfect," he said. "In these 2 years I can prepare better, take hospital administration courses, and you can systematize all your knowledge about implementing inclusive programs." The deal was made. Emily would continue with the project in New York City for 2 more years, and then become Stephen's partner in the first network of inclusive clinics in the United States. The next 2 years were intense. Emily implemented the program in all 50 planned hospitals, trained over 2,000 healthcare professionals, and created a comprehensive manual for inclusive care that would be distributed nationwide. Mr. Walter, now 74 years old, continued to be her faithful partner throughout the entire process. His energy and wisdom were the driving force of the project. "You know what amazes me most about you?" Emily said to him during one of their last classes in the public program. "What?" "That at 74 years old you still have the same passion as when we first met." "It's because I found my purpose," he responded in ASL. "When we find our reason for being, age doesn't matter anymore." The last hospital to receive the program was a small municipal hospital on the outskirts of New York City. It was a simple unit with few resources, but the staff was extremely motivated. Dr. George Baker, the unit's director, welcomed Emily and Mr. Walter with tears in his eyes. "You have no idea what this means for our community," she said. "We have many deaf patients here, and they've always felt excluded from the healthcare system." During the implementation, Emily met Mrs. Margaret, an 80-year-old woman who had been deaf since age 30 after contracting meningitis. "I could never go to the doctor alone," she told Emily in ASL. "I always had to bring my daughter to translate. Sometimes she was busy and I went without care." "And how do you feel now?" asked Emily. "For the first time in 50 years, I feel respected," replied Mrs. Margaret, with tears in her eyes. That conversation captured the entire meaning of Emily's work. It wasn't just about communication, but about human dignity. By the end of the 2 years, the program had served over 50,000 deaf patients. Satisfaction rates reached record levels, and cases of medical errors due to communication failures were virtually eliminated. The Department of Health decided to expand the program nationwide, using the manual developed by Emily as its foundation. At the pilot project's closing ceremony, Emily was honored by the government of the state of New York. She received a Medal of Honor and a certificate of recognition for her contribution to public health. "5 years ago, I was just a shy receptionist in Philadelphia," she said in her speech, alternating between ASL and English. "Today I'm here because I learned that our greatest strength lies in our apparent weaknesses. My shyness taught me to listen. My difficulty with verbal communication led me to discover other ways to speak from the heart." In the audience were all the people who had made that journey possible. Dr. Richard, who had come from Philadelphia especially for the ceremony. Karen, who was now the new inclusion coordinator at Mercy Medical Center. Stephen, who was finalizing preparations for the opening of the network's first clinic. And of course, Mr. Walter and Mrs. Dorothy, the couple who had started this entire transformation. "I want to dedicate this recognition to all the people who taught me that there are many ways to be strong," Emily continued, "especially to Mr. Walter, who showed me that silence sometimes speaks louder than any words." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Emily looked at Mr. Walter, who was crying with emotion, and made an ASL sign he had taught her years before. "Thank you for teaching me to fly." 1 month later, Emily and Stephen inaugurated the first Healing Hands clinic in New York City. It was a small unit, but fully adapted for inclusive care. All staff were fluent in ASL, equipment had visual alerts in addition to audio ones, and each exam room had assistive technology. Mr. Walter was invited to cut the ribbon at the opening. "This clinic represents something much bigger than a business," Emily said during the event. "It stands as proof that when we include everyone, we build a better society for all." In the first 6 months, the clinic served over 2,000 deaf patients, many from other states. The business model proved not only socially responsible, but also economically viable. Stephen, who had become an expert in inclusive hospital management, planned to open the second unit in Philadelphia the following year. "Emily, do you remember when I was that sad boy who had lost his hearing?" he asked during a planning meeting. "I remember," she replied. "And I remember how Mr. Walter transformed your pain into strength. Today I realize that difficult moment in my life was what prepared me for this purpose. If I hadn't experienced firsthand what it's like to have communication difficulties, I would never understand the importance of our work. Sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest strengths," agreed Emily. The second clinic was inaugurated in Philadelphia, exactly where everything had begun. Dr. Richard made a point of providing space within Mercy Medical Center for the new venture. "It's symbolic," he said during the inauguration. "Everything started here, with a conversation in ASL in the hallway. Now we're creating a legacy." Emily, now 28 years old, had become one of the leading references in inclusive healthcare in the United States. She received invitations to speak internationally, had written 2 books about medical communication, and her story inspired people all over the world. But her greatest pride remained her relationship with Mr. Walter, who at 76 years old maintained impressive energy. "Professor," she said one day, using the affectionate nickname she had adopted for him, "have you ever thought about really retiring?" "Retire from what?" he answered in ASL. From doing what I love? Never. But you've already done so much. Emily, he interrupted her, when you saved my wife that day at the clinic, it wasn't just a medical act, it was an act of love. And love doesn't retire. It was true. Dorothy, now 72 years old, was perfectly healthy, controlling her heart condition with medication and regular checkups. The couple had moved to New York City to be closer to work and had become like adoptive grandparents to Emily. In 2028, 5 years after the inauguration of the first clinic, the Healing Hands Network already had 12 units spread across the United States. Emily had become CEO of the company, and Stephen focused on expansion and technological innovation. During an international conference in Geneva, Emily was invited to speak about the American model of inclusive healthcare. It was the first time she would present her work outside the United States. 5 years ago, a simple conversation in sign language changed not just one life, but an entire community. She said to an audience of over 1,000 healthcare professionals from 40 different countries. Today I want to share with you not just inclusive communication techniques, but a philosophy that truly caring for people means seeing them in their entirety. The presentation was an absolute success. Several countries expressed interest in implementing similar programs, and Emily was invited to advise on the development of public inclusion policies in Canada. "Do you realize the magnitude of what you've achieved?" asked Stephen during the flight back to the United States. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," admitted Emily. "I remember how shy I was, how afraid I was to talk to people, and now you speak to the whole world. But the essence remains the same. I'm still talking about the importance of listening, of seeing, of including. It's just that now I have a bigger platform." Back in the United States, Emily decided it was time for a new challenge. She wanted to create a university specialized in inclusive healthcare, where professionals from all over the world could train. The Healing Hands University was inaugurated in 2029 on a modern campus in the city of Pittsburgh. Mr. Walter was named Honorary Chancellor, a recognition of his fundamental contribution to the development of the field. Who would have thought a retired teacher would become a university chancellor at 77? He joked during the inauguration ceremony. "You were never an ordinary teacher," replied Emily. "You were a life educator." The university offered undergraduate and graduate courses in inclusive medicine, adapted physical therapy, communication psychology, and humanized hospital management. Students from all over the world applied to study there. Emily, at 32 years old, had become one of the most influential people in American healthcare. But she continued living in the same simple apartment in New York City, still regularly visiting her clinics, and still maintaining close relationships with her patients. "Never forget where you came from," Mr. Walter always said. "The day you stop being moved by a story like ours will be the day you've lost your purpose." On a Tuesday morning, Emily was in her office at the New York clinic when she received an unexpected visitor. It was a young woman about 22 years old, visibly nervous. "Dr. Emily?" she asked timidly. "My name is Rachel. I wanted to speak with you." "Of course, have a seat. How can I help you?" "I'm a receptionist at a hospital here in New York City, and I have a lot of trouble talking to people. I'm very shy." Emily smiled, recognizing her younger self. "And what can I do for you?" "There's a deaf patient who comes to the hospital often. She gets frustrated because nobody can communicate with her. I wanted to learn ASL to help her, but my boss says it's not necessary." Emily felt a wave of familiar emotion. "How did you hear about me?" "I saw your television interview about how you were shy and learned ASL to help people. I really identified with your story." "Rachel," said Emily, standing up and approaching the young woman, "do you know what was the best decision I ever made in my life?" "No." "It was deciding to help someone even when everyone said it wasn't my job. It was from that moment that I discovered who I really was." Rachel began to cry. "But I'm so afraid." "Fear is normal. I was very afraid too. But you know what I learned? The fear of not trying is much worse than the fear of failing." Emily spent the next hour talking with Rachel, sharing her experience and offering guidance. At the end, she invited the young woman to participate in the free ASL courses that the clinic offered to the community. "One last thing, Rachel," said Emily as the young woman was leaving. "A few years from now, when you've helped many people and discovered your strength, remember to look for other young women like we were. The circle of help must continue." "I promise," replied Rachel, now with a smile on her face. When Rachel left, Emily became thoughtful. She had seen in the young receptionist the same lost look she herself had years ago. It was as if life was giving her the opportunity to be for someone what Mr. Walter had been for her. That afternoon, she told her professor about the encounter. "What do you think? Should I follow her progress?" she asked. "Of course," he replied in ASL, "but not as a mentor, as a friend. Just like I wasn't your mentor, I was your journey companion." "You're right. Sometimes we forget that helping doesn't mean directing people's lives. It means being present when they need it, and stepping back when they're ready to fly alone." 6 months later, Rachel had become fluent in ASL and was coordinating an inclusion program at her hospital. Emily monitored her progress from a distance, offering support when needed, but allowing the young woman to find her own path. It was rewarding to see how the seed planted years ago continued to germinate in new people, creating a growing network of professionals committed to inclusion. In 2032, Emily completed 10 years since her first promotion at Mercy Medical Center. To mark the date, she decided to organize a special event, a gathering of all the people who had been impacted by her work. The event was held in the auditorium of Healing Hands University. Doctors from across the United States who had implemented inclusive programs in their institutions attended, along with patients who had been treated over the years, clinic staff, and many others. Mr. Walter, now 80 years old, was the star of the evening. In his speech, he gave an emotional look back at the journey that had begun with a simple request for help. 10 years ago, I walked into a clinic feeling desperate, he said, with Emily translating. I never imagined that, from that moment of despair, something so beautiful would be born. The lesson I learned is that when we reach out to help someone, often we are the ones who end up being helped. Emily, invited to speak last, took the stage visibly moved. When I look at you, I see so much more than an audience, she said. I see a family that was born from a chance meeting between two people who needed each other. She paused and looked at Mr. Walter. Professor, you always say that I saved your wife that day, but the truth is, you saved my life. You taught me that my voice exists even when it doesn't come from my throat. You taught me that I can be strong by being kind, that I can lead by being humble. The auditorium was completely silent, everyone deeply moved. But the greatest lesson I learned is this: when we decide to truly see people, when we decide to include instead of exclude, when we decide to reach out instead of turn away, we don't just change the lives of others. We change our own lives, our community, our world. The applause was long and warm. People hugged, cried, and shared stories. Karen, who had traveled from Philadelphia especially for the event, approached Emily. You know what amazes me the most about all of this, she said. What? That you remember every single person you've helped. You know their stories. You care about the details. That's not common. It's because every person I've met on this journey has taught me something, Emily replied, including you, Karen. You taught me that everyone deserves a second chance. Karen smiled warmly. And you taught me that sometimes we need to unlearn our prejudices to relearn how to be human. At that moment, a young woman approached the group. It was Rachel, the receptionist who had sought out Emily 2 years earlier. Dr. Parker, she said, visibly emotional, I wanted to share some news. Tell me. I got accepted into medical school. I want to specialize in inclusive care. Emily hugged her tightly. What wonderful news, and where will you study? Right here, at your university, Rachel replied. I want to learn from the person who inspired me to discover my calling. Mr. Walter, who had been observing the entire conversation, came closer. The circle is complete, he said in ASL with a wise smile. No, replied Emily, also in ASL. The circle has expanded. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this moving story. Do you think Emily made the right decision by accepting all the challenges that appeared in her life? How do you think you would have reacted in her place? Leave your honest opinion in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. If the story touched your heart in a special way, share it with us. Thank you so much for your company, and don't forget to leave your like. Most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that will move you